good to see everybody this morning, or it was before. We are in Matthew, chapter 14. We're past the parables, the kingdom parables of chapter 13. And hopefully, there were some things that you gained out of that study. I think Jesus gave a lot of very good information in that chapter, in those kingdom parables. But again, I'll remind you, parables are stories with one main plot, and you can't make them walk on all four. It just doesn't work. And they were to really give a focus on something that is taught and backed up elsewhere in the Scriptures. So, as we move on, we finished chapter 13, and we didn't get all the way through chapter 13, but the last part of it, Jesus is in Nazareth. He's rejected there. They say in verse 55, is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, his brethren James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? Jesus did have brothers and sisters, half-brothers and sisters, contrary to what many teach. His sisters, are they not all with us? Whence then hath this man all these things? And they were offended in him. But Jesus said unto them, a prophet is not without honor, save in his own country and in his own house. And he did not many mighty works there because of their unbelief. So that's where we left off with chapter 13. We pick it up this morning, chapter 14, the title of the lesson, and I'm with Dan. The adult class, the font should be getting bigger, not smaller. I'm not sure. It must have been a young person that rewrote these quarterlies, but that's all right. The title lesson is Jesus Demonstrated His Power. And we've seen that all through our study of Matthew to this point. We see the Old Testament prophecies that Jesus fulfilled in his birth. We've seen the miracles that he performed that established him as deity, as Lord, Savior, Messiah. Again, fulfilling prophecy. We've seen his teachings. And now as we get into chapter 14, we're going to see some more evidence of his power, his miracles, his healings. And yet, we will still continue to see that people will see these things with their own eyes, and they'll hear his words with their ears, and they will still reject him. As we begin chapter 14, the focus in the quarterly is 14:22 to 33. We'll go ahead and start at verse 1. The key verse, 14:23, and when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray, and when the evening was come, he was there alone. Jesus, many times, is identifying as going to the Father in prayer. He did it publicly. He did it privately. He did it regularly, and he did it spontaneously. And his prayer life is an example for us today. He went to the Father and gave him his supplications, his request. And we need to do the same thing. It's even more important for us. Jesus is God. He is all-powerful. Even though he came in the form of flesh, his only limit to his power was what he placed on himself. So, if he saw the need to go to the Father in prayer, we also should do the same. The application, the student will recognize the limitless power Jesus has even over the physical laws of the universe and learn to cast his cares, our cares on him. I think that's probably a mistake. Anything before we get started? We have several different aspects in 14 events, I guess would be a more appropriate word, that we'll hopefully look at this morning. Let's go ahead and start, if somebody would read Matthew 14, 1 through 14.
Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus and said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist, who is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves of him. For Herod had laid hold on John and found him and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. For John said unto him, It is not lawful for thee to have her. And when he would have put him to death, he feared the multitude, because they counted him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced with them and pleased Herod. Whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she, being before instructed of her mother, said, Give me here John Baptist's head in a charger. And the king was sorry, nevertheless, for the oath's sake. And them which sat with them at meat, he commanded it to be given her. And he sent and beheaded John in prison. And his head was brought in a charger, given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took up the body and buried it, and went and told Jesus.
Okay, so if you go back to Matthew 4 and 12, now when Jesus had heard that John was cast into prison, he departed into Galilee. So we see at that time that John had been cast into prison. We later learn that he is killed by Herod, but we don't get any details. Here in chapter 14, we get the details around John the Baptist's death. Begins here, at that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus, and said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist, he is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. Now, so this is the event, this is the time of the event related to Herod hearing of the fame of Jesus. Okay? So, we go through 13, the parables, Jesus speaking in Nazareth, and then here, Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus. This is already, John has already been beheaded. He's already dead. But this fame that comes to, that's reported to Herod, he's identifying it with John the Baptist, who is already dead. Okay? Does everybody follow? Ask questions. Feel free to ask questions. Questions helps to clarify, not just for you, but for everybody else too. So feel free to ask questions. He heard the fame of Jesus. His response, this is John the Baptist. He's risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. For Herod had laid hold on John. He's going back and recounting for us. So the event that's occurring right then and there is the fame of Jesus after these things have occurred. We're now getting the story of John and what happened exactly to John. Now, before we get into that, who is Herod? King? I'm sorry? No?
He's Herod Antipas.
Herod Antipas.
He's more or less a puppet king.
Puppet king. Under Rome.
He is, yeah, actually his territory is Galilee.
Yep. Yep. Galilee. Now,
He was son of Herod the Great.
Herod the Great. Okay, so Herod the Great. Now, they were kings over different areas of Israel. And I say they, Herod the Great was king over that region. Herod the Great died. Who became kings then?
Archelaus first, he didn't last long.
Yep.
Antipas replaced him, and then Roman, Herod Antipas had Galilee, and Herod Philip had Tyre.
So, Herod the Great, by name, the Great, he had become very powerful, and Rome split the land after he passed. Tetrarch means fourth part. So there were 4 sections. It was split into 4 sections, of which Herod, the Tetrarch, Herod Antipas, had one portion of it, and that included the land of Galilee. His brothers, Archelaus and Philip. Philip was a stepbrother by another wife of his. Much intrigue. Were these Jews? Were these Israelites? Edomites. Yeah, Idumean. It was a political position that they gained from Rome. They were not part of the lineage of David. They were not heirs to the throne of Israel. So keep that in mind. While they had some familiarity with the Jews and some of their religious and social customs, they were not Jewish. They didn't typically practice Judaism, and they were full of intrigue. If you want a soap opera, don't watch Days of Our Lives or As the World Turns. Are those still out there? Read the Maccabees. Huh? What? Okay. All right. Well, anyway, you don't have to turn that on. Read Maccabees. Take a look at the Intertestament period, Old Testament, New Testament, that 400 years. Kings were killing wives. They were killing brothers. They were killing their children because of fear of losing the throne. And very much so within the Herods, these Idumean kings. We go on. He said unto his servants, this is John the Baptist, he's risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. Now, what mighty works is he talking about? It's many of the things that we've read about. Yeah. Where did he hear this? Well, his servants, I'm sure, heard the scuttlebutt from around the countryside. It flowed into him. And from this, and keep in mind, these were very superstitious people. Even going up Paul with the Greeks in Athens, what did he say about them? That they were way too superstitious. That's exactly right. Very superstitious. So he thought it was John the Baptist who was risen from the dead, and mighty works do show forth themselves in him. Verse 3, for Herod had laid hold on John and bound him and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. All right, we start getting into the intrigue. Who is Herodias?
Philip's wife. Very dark for his.
Yes. Philip's wife, half-brother to Herod Antipas. Okay, so his brother's wife he took. The daughter of Aristobulus, who is the son of Herod the Great. Let's keep it in the family, right? Keep it in the family. I saw an article on interbreeding within families and the terrible damage that takes its toll over time. I mean, physical and mental. There is a reason that God instilled in the Jews in the law not to marry within the family. But that's another story for another time. Herodias, she was married to her uncle and left him and married her other uncle. That's what it boils down to. All right. Verse 4. For John said unto him, it is not lawful for thee to have her. John was a very reserved individual, wasn't he? he spoke the truth on many occasions, very clearly, very succinctly. While the people liked to hear him speak, there were many that he offended in his speaking. One of those happened to be the king over that region that he, where he preached. But it didn't stop him. Verse 5, and I'll add to that, I believe it's Mark. Mark and Luke both have accounts of this. It's not in John. But in Mark chapter 6, he indicates there that this was not a one-time statement, but it was something that John mentioned several times, that what he did was wrong. So, he took him into custody. He had him in prison for Herodias' sake, Herodias' wife. You can, well, no, I'm not going to go down that path. All right, very good. Verse 5, and when he would have put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. And certainly, he was a prophet, right? Prophesied of the Old Testament, Elijah to come, Elias to come. And so, they recognized that. Herod, although he was king, kings have all authority. Herod was under Rome. Still, do you think Rome wanted Herod stirring the pot, causing turmoil that didn't need to be? Did they want to have to send their armies all across their captured world to try to put down unrest? No. They preferred to focus on new lands, new territories. But Herod here feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet, and so he kept him in prison. Verse 6, but when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. What's her name? Yeah, Salome, Salome, however it's pronounced. You'll not find the name in the scriptures, but secular history, Josephus, gives us the name of Herodias.
Actually, one of the Gospels calls her Herodias as well.
You're right.
I don't know which one. I know I've read it.
Yeah. But not Salome. All right. So Herod's birthday came. Funny birthday. I promise I will not ask for anything stupid today. Can I take that back? I might. You never know. All right. Well, anyway, his birthday was kept. He had a feast, and there were many dignitaries, nobles that were invited to it. The daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. You can just imagine the type of dance. Pleased. Well, anyway. Verse 7. Whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatever she would ask. In Mark, what we'll find is that promise was up to half of the kingdom. Now, that's quite a gift to give. Obviously drunk, yes. That's exactly right. Much too much wine. So he promised an oath to give her whatever she would ask. And she, being therefore instructed of her mother, said, give me here John Baptist's head in a charger. Now, if you were given that offer, up to half of my kingdom, or whatever, up to that limit, what would come first to your mind?
That's what you want.
I mean, the wealth, the power, What came to Salome's mind? Salome's?
She asked her mother, what shall I ask?
Yeah. Now, in other areas of the Gospels, it sort of indicates that there probably was a conversation beforehand and some discussion. You know, it may very well have been just the normal everyday talk of, I can't stand that John the Baptist.
You know,
I'd love to have his head.
in spite of the fact that she's a heathen, she was obedient to her mother.
She was, to a fault.
I mean,
Yeah.
if my mom had said something like that, and then suddenly the offer's there, whoa, I want a Jaguar.
Yeah. That's right. And you know which one. You know which one, right?
XKE.
Okay. Absolutely. Yeah, so again, you know, I think this had been discussed. Mom was not happy with John. That's where the real burr was, or under the saddle, I guess you could say. Mom was not happy about John telling what she had done was wrong.
Ain't nobody
Yeah, all right. So, she probably knew it. She may have gone back and reconfirmed, hey, this is what I've been offered. Is this what you want? We don't know exactly, but verse 8 says, and she, being before instructed of her mother, said, give me here John Baptist's head in a charger. Verse 9, the king was sorry. Nevertheless, for the oath's sake, and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given her. Now, Mark 6 and 20 actually gives us a little bit more information around it. If you go back, verse 19, therefore Herodias had a quarrel with him being John, because of what he had said, and would have killed him, but she could not. It wasn't up to her to make that decision. Verse 20, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just man and a holy, and observed him when he heard him, and when he heard him, he did many things and heard him gladly. So, when you put these together, Herod wasn't happy about what John had said. Herod put him in prison, hoping to kill him. However, what happened in that time that he was in prison? And this could have been, some writers believe it could have been as much as a year that John was in this prison. What happened according to Mark 6 and 20? Do you remember what happened with Paul and Agrippa?
Herod listened to some of the things that John had to say.
Yeah.
The Herodians are descendants of Esau.
Yeah.
And Esau, even though he was cut off, was of Abraham's seed.
That's right.
So, they knew probably as much about the scriptures at this time as the Jews did. They rejected it as and chose pagan gods.
Yeah, that's right. So, Herod feared John. He was able to observe in that time that he was in prison that he was a just man and a holy, and observed him, and when he heard him, he did many things and heard him gladly. So he was very interested and intrigued in what John had to say. And the truth of God's word, when an individual will stop and listen to it, the truth of God's word does catch the ear. The problem is getting people to stop and listen to it. And again, you see the same thing with King Agrippa with Paul's preaching. His response was almost, thou persuadest me to be a Christian. King Agrippa by the way, was the brother to Herodias, Agrippa II. So, all right. We go on here. So verse 9 tells us the king was sorry. By this point, he appreciated much that John had to say. I'm sure he wished he would not say anything more about his wife. But for the oath's sake, he made a promise. Them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given her. It's very important that we be careful of those things that we promise, those things that we say. Anybody recall the story of Jephthah? Jephthah was a judge in Israel, and God called him to lead the army of Israel in battle. And Jephthah originally didn't want to, but he prayed about it and told God that if he would lead them to victory, he would offer the first thing that he saw when he returned home as sacrifice unto God. When he returned after the victory, what was the first that he saw? His daughter. His daughter. He wept immensely, and then he sacrificed his daughter. And in fact, she was cut in pieces and parts sent across the land of Israel as a reminder. It's very important that we make sure those things that we promise not be irresponsible. All right, that's aside. So verse 10 tells us, and he sent and beheaded John in prison, and his head was brought in a charger, and that was just a large flat platter, a large dish, and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her brother. Can you imagine being at this feast, this party, and the head of John being brought on a platter? Verse 12 says, and his disciples came and took up the body and buried it and went and told Jesus. When Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities. And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. Now, we're given just sort of this happened, that happened, that happened. We're not told specifically here the reason for Jesus' actions. But I would surmise that the hearing of of John's death, with what Jesus had said about John and the greatness of John, that it was very moving to him. He then, when he heard of it, verse 13 says, he departed thence by ship into a desert place, or a place apart. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him. There was no time in which he could get away from the people. Every time he would try to move on to another location, they would follow him. Verse 14, Jesus went forth, saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. Any thoughts or comments?
It's really not part of the lesson yet. It kind of struck me the way Herod was to hear John, and you mentioned he'd really rather he just not say nothing more about his wife. That's kind of what we have to deal with lost people, because their idea of being saved is what they have to give up.
That's right. That's exactly right.
I'd go to church, except I'd have to give up, whatever.
Yep. I agree with that. It also is a lesson for us that sometimes we are called to speak the truth in spite of how it's received. Now, the important thing is make sure if they're going to be offended, make sure it's the Word of God that offends them and not us. We can oftentimes be the offensive part in delivering a message. In attitude, in arrogance, in the way we say things. And so we need to consider exactly how we're presenting God's Word. But in the end, the truth is the truth.
Well, even Paul said that even if I have perfect words, it's nothing without the love.
That's right.
You know, care.
Yeah. And even with the love and the care, you know, it is oftentimes, communication is one of the most challenging things between human beings today. Always has been. Communication. I say something and I mean this. Somebody else hears it and they think that. Very challenging. It's more challenging today than it was 30 years ago. Why? Texting, Facebook, Twitter. You can go down through the whole social media thing. Talking to someone face to face is completely different. Absolutely, 100%. And I'm not saying to use those things.
But without facial expression or inflection, you know, you can write down something and mean one thing, and the other person doesn't see your face, doesn't hear your voice.
They say 70% of the communication is in the body. Facial expressions, even the body lean. You know, if I'm telling you like this, I'm probably scolding. Cindy reminds me oftentimes, you know, no, you're not delivering that right.
Well, even that one scripture that we joke about, I would not have you ignorant, brother. You know.
Oh yeah.
You can interpret that
Yeah.
if it's just written down.
So communication is always a challenge. We need to make sure that our love comes through as we deliver. All right, anything else? Verse 14 finishes that off where Jesus went forth, saw a great multitude, was moved with compassion. There was the love toward them, and he healed their sick. Now, we come to verse 15 through 21, and this is, again, very familiar scriptures. This is where Jesus feeds 5,000. Now, when we say 5,000, what are we talking about? Yes, 5,000 men. Did not include the women and the children that were there. They identified the number of men. So this was a massive, this was a stadium event. This is how big it was. This is, I believe, the only miracle in the Gospels that's contained in all four of the Gospels. Mark 6, Luke 9, and John 6, along with Matthew here. Says, verse 15, and when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, this is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go into the village, and buy themselves victuals. Victuals, that's right. Victuals is what I, yes, but okay, well then. Food. Yeah, food. Verse 16, but Jesus said unto them, they need not depart, give ye them to eat. And they say unto him, we have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He said, bring them hither to me. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake, and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat, and were filled. And they took up the fragments that remained, 12 baskets full, and they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. And this is the only place where we're given the number that were there. All right, so it's evening time. Yeah, he's just, verse 14, he went forth, saw a great multitude, was moved with compassion toward them. Do you think he didn't preach? Yeah. Every time that Jesus performed miracles, he was preaching, in the process of preaching, or moving between locations. So, yeah, I imagine that here, he was preaching, he healed their sick. Does that mean that they never got sick again? Does it mean that they didn't die? No. When Jesus preached and when he healed, what was permanent? The Word of God. Those that accepted it were saved. For how long? Forever, eternal. What's more important, that we feed the masses, that we clothe the masses, or is it that we share the gospel? What has the Lord's New Testament church been commissioned to do? I'm not saying along the way that we don't help in other physical ways.
Well, if they're physically in dire need of something, they're not gonna listen to you.
That's right.
So there's a kind of like a
Yeah,
symbiotic thing there.
absolutely. Absolutely. All right. His disciples came to him. It was evening. What was their concern? Verse 15 says, send the multitude away that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals. Evening time, into the villages. Or into the village, they said. How many people are we talking about again? We don't know exactly. But there are estimates anywhere from 10,000 to 25,000 people. How large were these villages? Where are these people going to find all this food that's needed? I mean, when the ball game lets out, what's it like trying to get out, trying to go to get something to eat? It's a mess, and it would have been a similar situation here. Jesus' response in verse 16 is what?
Just feed them.
Yeah, just feed them. Just feed them. Now, when you look at John chapter 6 through 9, the indication is that Jesus already had a plan. Verse 5, let's start at verse 5. When Jesus then lifted up his eyes and saw a great company come unto him, he saith unto Philip, whence shall we buy bread that these may eat? Verse 6, and this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. So what's this telling us? Jesus already had the plan laid out. He knew what he was going to do. So why does he tell them, as Matthew and John, and Luke and Mark all tell us here, why does he tell them to give you them to eat? Trust me. Again, he's proving to his disciples who he was, his power, his authority. Are there times where we need to revalidate Jesus in our lives? You know, confirm his strength, confirm our confidence in him?
God always had plans, but we just need sometimes to remind.
That's exactly right. Faith. Is faith a steady line that's like this? No. Our faith is like my weight. It goes up and it goes down. It goes up and it goes up more than it goes down. But it goes up and it goes down. What do you do when your weight goes up too much? Diet, exercise. There's a whole list of things that you can do about it. What do you do in regard to your faith? You strengthen it, right?
You have to do that exercising thing again.
That's exactly right. Exercise your faith. Rely on Jesus. Do you pick the biggest thing? Do you go to Niagara's and jump off? Try to walk across or climb in a wheelbarrow and have a buddy of yours push you across a tightrope across Niagara? No. Our everyday life, the little things. We have to strengthen our faith and build it up. Jesus, in verse 16, here in Matthew, he said unto them, they need not depart, give ye them to eat. And they say unto him, we have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Verse 18, he said, bring them hither to me. Now, what do you think the reaction of the disciples is at this point? supposing, but I would be scratching my head, what's he going to do with 5 loaves and 2 fishes? Now, what are we talking about loaves? Are we talking about big? No. Where'd they get it? One of the other gospel tells us where'd they get this? From a little boy.
He brought it for his lunch.
Yeah. It was enough to feed one person.
What
So,
a boy.
yeah. So 5 loaves and 2 fishes was not much food. In fact, I probably would have devoured it and been ready for fried chicken. Verse 19, he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, what did he do? He blessed it, and brake, and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to his multitude. So once again, we see an example here, Jesus praying, blessing the food that he was about to break and give to them. He gave the loaves to the disciples and the disciples to the multitude. Now, again, when Jesus performed a miracle, was there any doubt about the performance of that miracle? When you talk about a man who never walked in his entire life, when you talk about a man who had a withered arm, when you talk about 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and Jesus breaking and dividing out, and yet it never ended. I can't imagine sitting there and watching this transpire. In my mind, the withered hand, I can't in my mind see this hand, and then all of a sudden, because Jesus did not do anything gradually when it came to his miracles, they were immediate. It was whole. The bread he broke, and he continued to break. He gave the loaves to the disciples and the disciples to the multitude, and they did all eat and were filled. All thousands and thousands of people ate. Not only that, and they took up of the fragments that remained 12 baskets full. Why? None of it would be lost. Okay?
But Jesus told her, gather up the fragments and
There
not be
would
lost.
be none lost. Is there any limit to the grace of God? God's grace is more abundant than what's needed. There is no lost individual that cannot be saved. There is no one that's been too bad, too sinful, too despicable to be saved. We sometimes may think that in the back of our mind. Could a Hitler or a Stalin or something like that have been saved? Well, I know a murderer who was saved. King David, murdering adulterer. Paul considered himself the chiefest of all sinners. He persecuted the Lord's church. Yeah, he had blood on his hands. The blood of Stephen was on the hands of Paul. And yet, he was not only saved, but he was chosen for a special assignment. The grace of God exceeds all that's needed. It's abundant. They did all eat, and they were filled. I mean, it wasn't just enough to satisfy, but they were filled. They took up the fragments that remained, 12 baskets full, and they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, beside women and children. So, we have this miracle performed before not only the disciples, but the people there. Again, I want to stress, the miracles were for what purpose?
Prove that he was who he was.
He was who he was, and the message, confirm the message. However, miracles, healings, they have their limitations, don't they? And if you don't think they do, Look at John chapter 6, verses 22 and 26. John adds a little bit more information here. So, verse 1 through 21 gives John's details of feeding the 5,000 and walking on the water. And then, which we'll look at next, I think, maybe. And then verse 22 says, the day following, when the people which stood on the other side of the sea saw that there was none other boat there, save that one whereinto his disciples were entered, and that Jesus went not with his disciples into the boat, but that his disciples were gone away alone. So there's the setting. Skip over to 25. And when they had found him on the other side of the sea, they said unto him, Rabbi, when camest thou hither? Jesus answered them and said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, ye seek me not because ye saw the miracles, but because ye did eat of the loaves and were filled. They were wanting what? They wanted more food. So, what did they see in Jesus, many of them? Those that reject him as Messiah, they saw him as free food. Many of them saw him as free health care. But the biggest concern was John 6 and 15, and due to time we won't go over there. They saw him as the king, but not the Messiah. What do I mean by that? What were they looking for?
Looking for a physical king.
Physical king. They were under Roman rule. They were looking for a king that would come and that would throw off the rule of Rome, and they wanted to take him and make him their king. But it wasn't the time. This was Jesus bringing the gospel to the people. All right. 3 minutes. The last 3 minutes, we have Jesus walking on the water. We'll try to summarize it real quick. Straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into the ship and to go before him unto the other side while he sent the multitudes away. When he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. Again, we see Jesus praying regularly, spontaneously, publicly, and privately. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. So he had sent the disciples away on a ship. The evening's come, he's there alone. Verse 24, but the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking in the sea. So he sent them toward the evening time. The evening was come to cross the sea in a boat. The boat that they were in, we're told in Mark, was a rowboat. It was a boat with oars, not a sailboat. Yet here we see the wind blowing contrary, which caused what? They weren't being blown specifically by the wind, but the wind blowing the waves was pushing them to the point that while they left in the evening to cross the Sea of Galilee, how far is it across the Sea of Galilee? It's about 5 miles. I think Brother Evans indicated you could see from one side to the other, at least in several. They were still out there at the fourth watch. Now the fourth watch, the Jews had 3 watches. The Romans had 4. The fourth watch was 3 a.m., 6 a.m. So they've been out there all night long, battling these waves and making very little headway. Okay? I'm about to set this up and have to quit. In the 4th hour of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. Again, a miracle. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it's a spirit. And they cried out for fear. Now, who were these men? At least 4 of them were what occupation? Do you think they had dealt with Sea of Galilee before? Absolutely. They fished it regularly. But they were concerned. They were troubled. They cried out for fear. Straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid and began to sink. He cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? Now, we oftentimes pick on Peter. And talk about how he's so spontaneous. What can you say about this in Peter?
His faith is spontaneous.
He trusted enough where he was the lone one of the 12 that said, Lord, if it's really you, let me walk on the water. And he had faith to step out and walk on the water. Now, as we are in our own lives, do we run into obstacles that sometimes cause us to doubt? Absolutely. Absolutely. So, all right, we didn't get very far. Any other thoughts, comments?